The emergency alarm pierced through the cockpit as Captain Sarah Mitchell gripped the controls of Flight 847, watching her instruments flash red warnings across the dashboard. 237 passengers sat behind her, completely unaware that their lives now hung in the balance. The same airline that had rejected her application 12 times was now depending on her split-second decisions to prevent catastrophe. But this moment didn't happen overnight. It began 15 years earlier in a small town in Nebraska, with a girl who dared to dream of touching the sky. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the cornfield behind her family's farmhouse in Millbrook, Nebraska, watching the crop duster plane make its final pass over the Johnson farm next door. The yellow aircraft banked sharply against the azure sky, its engine roaring as it climbed before disappearing over the horizon. At 12 years old, Sarah had witnessed this same scene countless times, but today felt different. Today, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. "Mom, I'm going to be a pilot," she announced that evening at dinner, her voice carrying the unwavering certainty that only children possess. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, looked up from his meatloaf and chuckled. "That's nice, sweetheart." Past the mashed potatoes. But Sarah wasn't joking. While other kids in her class collected baseball cards or played video games, she spent her afternoons at the Millbrook Municipal Airport, a modest strip of asphalt that barely deserved the name airport. The facility consisted of a single runway, a small hangar, and a weather-beaten office building that housed the local flight school. Frank Rodriguez, the airport's owner and chief flight instructor, first noticed Sarah when she was 13. She would arrive every day after school, press in her face against the chain-link fence that surrounded the runway, watching planes take off and land with the intensity of someone studying for a final exam. "You sure spend a lot of time here," Frank said one afternoon, walking over to where Sarah stood at the fence. "I'm learning," she replied without taking her eyes off a Cessna 172 that was practicing touch-and-go landings. "Learning what?" "Everything. The way the pilot adjusts the flaps before landing, how the plane behaves in crosswinds. The sound the engine makes when it's running is rich versus lean." She finally turned to look at him. "I'm going to be a pilot." Frank had heard that declaration from dozens of kids over the years. Most lost interest after a few weeks. But something about Sarah's unwavering focus told him she was different. "Tell you what," he said, "if you're serious about this, you can help around here after school. Wash planes, organize the office, basic maintenance. In exchange, I'll teach you about aviation." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. But I warn you, it's not glamorous work, and learning to fly is harder than it looks." Sarah showed up the next day with work gloves and a notebook. While other teenagers were hanging out at the mall or playing sports, she was learning to read weather patterns, understanding weight and balance calculations, and memorizing federal aviation regulations. She absorbed knowledge like a sponge, asking questions that impressed even Frank with their sophistication. By the time she turned 16, Sarah had logged more hours in aircraft cockpits than most private pilots. She hadn't been flying them. She couldn't afford lessons, but she had been in the right seat during countless flights with Frank, watching, learning, and dreaming. Her parents, Linda and Thomas, initially viewed her aviation obsession as a phase. Linda, a nurse at the local hospital, worried about the dangers of flying. Thomas, who managed the grain elevator in town, couldn't understand why his daughter would want to leave the stability of farm life for something as uncertain as aviation. "It's not practical, Sarah," her mother said one evening as they discussed her plans for after high school. "Flying is expensive, dangerous, and frankly, it's not really a career for women." "Amelia Earhart was a woman," Sarah countered. "And look what happened to her," Linda replied. immediately regretting the words when she saw the hurt flash across her daughter's face. But Sarah's determination never wavered. She worked part-time jobs throughout high school, bagging groceries, waiting tables at the local diner, cleaning offices, saving every penny for flight lessons. On her 18th birthday, she finally had enough money for her first official flying lesson. The moment she took the controls of the Cessna 172 and felt the aircraft respond to her touch, Sarah knew she had found her calling. The ground fell away beneath her, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The cornfields of Nebraska stretched out below her like a patchwork quilt, and she could see for miles in every direction. "Nice work," Frank said from the instructor's seat beside her. "You've got natural instincts." Within 6 months, Sarah had earned her private pilot's license. She was 19 when she obtained her commercial license, and 20 when she became a certified flight instructor. But her real goal was always the airlines. She wanted to be the captain of a major commercial airliner, responsible for hundreds of passengers and millions of dollars in aircraft. The path to that goal led through Concordia Aviation Academy in Denver, Colorado, one of the most prestigious flight schools in the country. Sarah had been accepted, but the tuition was astronomical, far beyond what her family could afford. She would need to finance her education through loans, scholarships, and continued work. Leaving Millbrook felt like stepping into another world. Denver was a sprawling metropolis compared to her small farming community, and Concordia Aviation Academy was a temple to aviation excellence. The facility boasted state-of-the-art simulators, a fleet of modern training aircraft, and instructors who were former military pilots and airline captains. Sarah's first day at the academy was overwhelming. Her classmates came from privileged backgrounds. Many were the children of airline pilots, military officers, or wealthy business owners. They spoke casually about family vacations to Europe, expensive cars, and trust funds. Sarah, meanwhile, was living in a tiny apartment off campus, working nights at a restaurant to pay for food and textbooks. "Where are you from?" asked Bradley Hampton, a fellow student whose father was a captain at a major airline. "Nebraska," Sarah replied. "Oh, cool. Omaha? Millbrook. It's a small farming town." Bradley looked confused. "I've never heard of it." "Do they even have an airport there?" "A small one," Sarah said, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her humble beginnings. Despite the social challenges, Sarah excelled academically. She threw herself into her studies with the same intensity she had shown back in Millbrook. While her classmates partied on weekends, she was in the library studying weather patterns, navigation procedures, and aircraft systems. Her practical flying skills, honed through years of observation and hands-on experience with Frank, gave her an edge over students who had learned everything from textbooks. Captain Rebecca Torres, one of the Academy's most demanding instructors, noticed Sarah's dedication early on. A former Air Force pilot who had broken barriers herself in military aviation, Torres recognized something special in the young woman from Nebraska. "Mitchell," she called out after a particularly challenging instrument flight lesson. "Stay behind." For a moment, Sarah's heart sank. She assumed she had made a mistake during the flight. "You flew that approach perfectly," Torres said, surprising her. "Better than students who have been here twice as long. Where did you learn to read weather like that?" "I grew up around a small airport," Sarah explained. "The owner taught me to watch the sky, to feel changes in the air pressure, to understand how weather moves across the landscape." Torres nodded approvingly. "That's real-world experience. Don't lose that. Too many pilots these days rely entirely on instruments and computers. They forget that flying is still about understanding the atmosphere, reading the subtle signs that machines can't detect." Sarah graduated from Concordia Aviation Academy at the top of her class, with every certification needed to pursue a career with a major airline. She had accumulated over 1,500 flight hours, far exceeding the minimum requirements. Her instructor recommendations were glowing, her test scores were perfect, and her simulator performance was exceptional. She was ready to conquer the world of commercial aviation. The reality of job hunting hit her like a brick wall. Sarah had assumed that her excellent qualifications would open doors immediately. Instead, she found herself facing a system that seemed designed to exclude her. The major airlines preferred candidates with military experience or connections within the industry. Her small-town background and lack of family connections in aviation worked against her. Her first application was to Skyline Airlines, one of the country's largest carriers. She spent weeks preparing her application, crafting the perfect cover letter, and rehearsing for the interview. The response came 3 weeks later, a form letter thanking her for her interest but informing her that they had selected other candidates. The second rejection came from Continental Express, the third from Pacific Airways. Each rejection felt like a personal blow, but Sarah refused to give up. She expanded her search to regional airlines, cargo carriers, and charter services. The responses were always the same, polite rejections that offered no explanation for why she wasn't selected. Between job applications, Sarah worked as a flight instructor at a small flight school in Denver, building her hours and staying current on her certifications. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover her student loan payments and basic living expenses. She shared a cramped apartment with 3 roommates and survived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. Maybe you should consider other career options, her mother suggested during one of their weekly phone calls. There are good opportunities in healthcare, or you could come back to Millbrook and work at the bank. I'm not giving up, Sarah replied firmly. This is what I was meant to do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the time she submitted her 12th application to Skyline Airlines, the same company that had rejected her initially, Sarah had accumulated over 3,000 flight hours, earned additional certifications in jet aircraft, and gained experience in challenging weather conditions and emergency procedures. She had also developed a thick skin and an unshakable determination that rejection couldn't break. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was reviewing flight plans with a student when her cell phone rang. Double quotes, Ms. Mitchell. This is Captain Jennifer Walsh from Skyline Airlines. We'd like to invite you for an interview next week. Sarah's hand trembled as she wrote down the details. After 12 rejections and 3 years of persistence, she finally had a chance to prove herself to the airline that would eventually depend on her skills to save lives. The interview process at Skyline Airlines was grueling. Sarah faced a panel of senior pilots, human resources managers, and company executives. They questioned her about technical procedures, emergency protocols, and her ability to handle stress. She flew simulator scenarios that tested her skills in crisis situations, from engine failures to severe weather encounters. "Why do you want to work for Skyline Airlines?" asked Captain Michael Chun, the chief pilot who would ultimately decide her fate. Sarah looked directly at him. "Because I want to be part of an organization that values safety, professionalism, and excellence. I've been preparing for this opportunity my entire life. I know I have what it takes to be an asset to your team." 3 weeks later, she received the call that would change everything. "Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell. We'd like to offer you a position as a first officer with Skyline Airlines." Sarah's journey from the cornfields of Nebraska to the cockpit of a commercial airliner had taken 8 years, 12 rejections, and countless hours of hard work. But as she hung up the phone, she knew that every challenge had been worth it. She was finally going to live her dream. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The real test of her skills, courage, and determination was still ahead of her, waiting at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. On a routine flight that would become anything but routine, the Skyline Airlines training facility in Phoenix, Arizona, was a monument to aviation technology. Rows of full-motion simulators lined the main floor, each one capable of replicating every aspect of flying a Boeing 737. Sarah Mitchell stood in the lobby on her first day, watching experienced pilots stride confidently through the corridors. Their crisp uniforms and confident demeanor a stark contrast to her nervous energy. "First day?" asked a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find a tall man with graying temples and captain's stripes on his shoulders. His name tag read Captain James Whitfield. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah replied, managing a smile. "We all had a first day." "I'm Jim. I'll be your training captain for the next 6 weeks." The new hire class consisted of 12 pilots, mostly men in their 30s and 40s with military backgrounds. Sarah was the only woman, and at 25, one of the youngest. During introductions, she listened to stories of combat missions, years of flying cargo across dangerous territories, and family legacies in aviation. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said when her turn came. "I'm from Nebraska, and I've been instructing for the past few years while building my hours." The polite nods around the room couldn't hide the skeptical glances. She had learned to expect this reaction, but it still stung. Captain Whitfield proved to be a demanding but fair instructor. He pushed every student to their limits, but Sarah noticed he seemed particularly focused on testing her resolve. During their first simulator session, he programmed a series of increasingly complex emergencies that would challenge even experienced pilots. "Engine failure on takeoff," he announced, shutting down the left engine just as the aircraft lifted off. Sarah's hands moved instinctively to the controls, maintaining directional control while following the emergency checklist. She executed a perfect single-engine approach and landing. "Not bad," Whitfield said. "Let's try something more interesting." He programmed a hydraulic failure combined with severe weather and a bird strike. Sarah handled each emergency with precision, her years of studying weather patterns and aircraft systems paying off in ways her classmates couldn't match. After the session, Whitfield pulled her aside. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" he asked. "I've been around aviation since I was 12, Sarah replied. "I learned from a crop duster pilot who taught me that every flight is different. Every situation requires adaptation." Whitfield nodded slowly. "That's old school thinking. Good. Too many pilots today rely on autopilot and computers. They forget that flying is about making decisions when the unexpected happens." Sarah's reputation as a skilled pilot grew during training, but acceptance from her peers came slowly. The break room conversations often stopped when she entered. Invitations to after-work gatherings were rare. She found herself eating lunch alone, studying while others socialized. The only exception was Marcus Thompson, a former Marine pilot who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Unlike the others, Marcus seemed genuinely interested in her background and flying experience. "You know," he said one afternoon as they practiced instrument approaches in the simulator, "I've flown with pilots who had 10 times more experience than you, but they couldn't handle emergencies the way you do. You've got something special." "Thanks," Sarah said, surprised by the compliment. "I just try to be prepared for everything." "That's the thing, you can't be prepared for everything. What you have is intuition. You feel the aircraft, you read the situation. That's not something you can teach." Sarah graduated from training with the highest scores in her class, but she knew that real acceptance would only come through proving herself in actual flight operations. Her first assignment was as a first officer on domestic routes, primarily short flights between major cities. Captain Robert Sterling was her first line partner, a 30-year veteran who had been flying for Skyline since its early days. Sterling had a reputation for being tough on new pilots, particularly those he felt hadn't earned their place in the cockpit. "So you're the one who took 12 tries to get hired," he said during their first briefing, not looking up from his flight plan. I prefer to think of it as persistence, Sarah replied evenly. Sterling finally looked at her. We'll see. This isn't flight school anymore, Mitchell. Real passengers, real weather, real consequences. Their first flight together was a routine run from Denver to Chicago. Sarah handled the pre-flight checks with methodical precision, but Sterling redid every calculation, double-checked every setting, and questioned every decision she made. You're setting the altimeter wrong, he said as they prepared for departure. Sarah looked at her instrument. Sir, I have 30.15, which matches. The Otis. Check it again. She verified the setting 3 times before Sterling grudgingly agreed it was correct. This pattern continued throughout the flight. Every radio call was criticized, every course correction questioned, every landing approach scrutinized. Not bad for a first flight, Sterling said as they completed their post-flight checks in Chicago. But don't let it go to your head. You've got a lot to learn. Sarah's schedule was brutal. Junior pilots typically received the least desirable routes, early morning departures, late-night arrivals, multiple stops with quick turnarounds. She found herself flying to small cities across the Midwest and South, often dealing with challenging weather conditions that tested her skills. During a particularly difficult approach into Little Rock, Arkansas, during a thunderstorm, Sarah demonstrated the weather reading skills that Frank Rodriguez had taught her years earlier. While the aircraft's weather radar showed a solid line of storms ahead, Sarah noticed subtle wind shifts and pressure changes that indicated a narrow corridor of calmer air. I think we can thread through here, she told Captain David Park, who was flying that day. The radar shows solid red, Park replied. We should request a hold. Look at the wind direction indicators, Sarah said, pointing to her instruments. There's a gap in the storm line at 2 o'clock about 15 miles ahead. The pressure gradient suggests it's moving southeast. Park studied the instruments for a moment, then looked at the radar again. You're right, I can see it now. Nice catch. They navigated through the storm corridor safely, arriving in Little Rock while other flights were diverted or delayed. Word of Sarah's weather instincts spread among the pilot community, earning her grudging respect from some of her colleagues, but respect didn't come easily. During a crew meeting in Atlanta, Captain Harrison Brooks, a senior pilot with a reputation for speaking his mind, made his opinion clear. I don't care how well she flies, he said, loud enough for Sarah to hear. The cockpit is no place for a woman. It's about upper body strength, quick reflexes, and the ability to make tough decisions under pressure. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She could have ignored the comment, but she decided to address it directly. Captain Brooks, she said, standing up. I understand your concerns, but I've been flying for 8 years. I've handled multiple emergency situations, and I've never had a single incident or violation. I'm not here to prove anything except that I can do the job safely and professionally. The room fell silent. Brooks stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. We'll see, he said. The test came sooner than anyone expected. Sarah was working a flight from Dallas to Nashville with Captain Lisa Chun, one of the few female captains at Skyline Airlines. The Boeing 737 was loaded with 180 passengers, including a group of high school students returning from a band competition. As they climbed through 25,000 feet, Sarah noticed an unusual vibration in the aircraft. The instrument showed normal readings, but something felt wrong. Do you feel that? She asked Captain Chun. Feel what? There's a slight vibration, maybe in the left engine. It's subtle, but it's there. Chun checked her instruments. Everything looks normal. Engine parameters are good. Sarah trusted her instincts. She had learned to listen to aircraft, to feel anomalies that instruments might not detect. The vibration was getting stronger, barely perceptible, but definitely present. I think we should consider a precautionary landing, she suggested. Based on what? All our readings are normal. Before Sarah could respond, the master caution light illuminated. The left engine's oil pressure began fluctuating wildly. Within seconds, the engine was shaking violently, and smoke was visible from the wing. Engine failure, Sean announced, immediately beginning the emergency checklist. Sarah's hands moved automatically to the controls, helping to stabilize the aircraft as Chun shut down the failing engine. They declared an emergency and requested an immediate diversion to Memphis, the nearest suitable airport. The approach into Memphis was complicated by gusty winds and the aircraft's reduced performance on a single engine. Sarah monitored the instruments, while Chun flew, calling out airspeed, altitude, and configuration changes with precision. Flaps 30, landing checklist complete, Sarah announced as they turned towards the final approach. Nice job spotting that engine problem, Chun said as they rolled out on the runway. Your instincts probably saved us from a much worse situation. The maintenance inspection revealed that the engine was on the verge of complete failure. If they had continued to Nashville, the engine would likely have suffered catastrophic damage, possibly leading to an uncontrollable fire or even structural failure. Captain Chen's report praised Sarah's alertness and professional handling of the emergency. Word spread quickly through the pilot community, and Sarah found herself gaining acceptance among her peers. But the real breakthrough came during a flight with Captain Sterling, the same pilot who had questioned her abilities during her first flight. They were flying from Phoenix to Denver when they encountered severe turbulence that forced them to divert their route significantly. Air traffic control is routing everyone south to avoid the worst of it, Sterling said, studying the weather radar. But that's going to add an hour to our flight time. Sarah looked at the weather display and remembered her training from Nebraska. She studied the wind patterns, the pressure gradients, and the movement of the storm systems. Captain, I think there's a way through the weather at our current position, she said. If we climb to 39,000 feet and turn about 10 degrees left, we should find a corridor of smoother air. Sterling looked skeptical. That's right through the heart of the storm system. Not through it, but between the cells. The pressure patterns suggest there's a narrow band of calmer air at that altitude. Sterling studied the instruments for several minutes. The official weather routing would add significant time and fuel consumption to their flight. More importantly, it would delay their arrival for passengers who had connecting flights. All right, Mitchell, he said finally. Show me what you've got. Sarah coordinated with air traffic control to climb to 39,000 feet and adjust their heading. As they ascended, the turbulence began to decrease. At their new altitude, they found themselves in smooth air, threading between towering thunderstorms on either side. I'll be damned, Sterling said, watching the weather radar show storm cells passing just miles away on both sides. How did you know that would work? I learned to read weather from a crop duster pilot in Nebraska, Sarah replied. He taught me that storms have patterns, and if you understand how air moves, you can find the safe paths. They arrived in Denver on schedule, having avoided both the delays and the rough ride that other flights experienced. As they completed their post-flight procedures, Sterling turned to Sarah. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew you, and that was wrong. You're a hell of a pilot. Thank you, Captain. That means a lot. I'm going to recommend you for upgrade training. You're ready to be a captain. Sarah's promotion to captain came after 3 years as a first officer, faster than average for the airline. Her reputation for safety, professionalism, and exceptional weather instincts had earned her the respect of both management and her peers. The transition to captain brought new responsibilities and challenges. She was now responsible for the safety of every flight, the final decision-maker in all situations. Her first officer assignments included some of the same pilots who had questioned her abilities when she was new to the airline, It's Captain Mitchell now, she said during her first flight as captain with Captain Brooks, who was now serving as her first officer due to bidding for a more favorable schedule. Brooks smiled. Yes, ma'am, I have to admit, I was wrong about you. You've earned this. Sarah's reputation continued to grow. She became known for her ability to handle difficult weather conditions, her calm demeanor in emergency situations, and her skill in training new pilots. The airline began assigning her to some of their most challenging routes, including international flights that required the highest level of expertise. But the ultimate test of her abilities was still ahead. On a routine flight from New York to London, with 237 passengers depending on her skills and judgment, Sarah would face the greatest challenge of her career. The same airline that had rejected her 12 times would soon discover that their decision to finally hire her had been the best choice they ever made. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was asleep in her hotel room in London, preparing for her return flight to New York the next day. The phone's shrill ring cut through the darkness. Captain Mitchell? This is operations. We have a situation. Sarah Mitchell's eyes snapped open in the darkness of her London hotel room. The red digital clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. The phone continued its urgent ringing, cutting through the silence like a blade. Captain Mitchell, this is operations. We have a situation. The voice belonged to Amanda Wells, the night shift supervisor at Skyline Airlines London Operations Center. Sarah could hear the tension in her voice, the kind of strain that came with genuine crisis. What's the situation? Sarah asked, already reaching for the lamp switch. Flight 847 departed JFK 3 hours ago, bound for Heathrow. Captain Reynolds suffered a heart attack approximately 20 minutes into the flight. The first officer, Jake Morrison, is a relatively new pilot with limited experience on international routes. The aircraft is currently at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic with 237 passengers aboard. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew both pilots. Captain Tom Reynolds was a veteran with an impeccable safety record, but he was also nearing retirement and had been dealing with health issues. Jake Morrison was competent but had only been with the airline for 18 months. What's Morrison's status report? Sarah asked, pulling on her uniform. He's maintaining course and altitude, but he's requested immediate assistance. The weather between here and the eastern seaboard is deteriorating rapidly. We've got a massive storm system moving in from the west, and several airports are already reporting severe conditions. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. A relatively inexperienced first officer, alone in the cockpit of a Boeing 777 with nearly 400 tons of aircraft, facing potentially dangerous weather conditions over the Atlantic Ocean. What do you need from me? She asked, though she already knew the answer. We need you to talk him through this. You're the most experienced captain we have available in the European theater right now. Captain Phillips is on vacation. Captain Martinez is grounded with the flu, and Captain Chen is already airborne on another flight. Sarah was already moving toward the door. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Heathrow Operations Center took her through the quiet streets of London in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah used the time to mentally prepare herself for what lay ahead. She had trained for situations like this, but talking a pilot through a crisis from the ground was vastly different from being in the cockpit yourself. The operations center was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Dispatchers monitored weather patterns, flight coordinators tracked aircraft positions, and maintenance supervisors stood ready to provide technical support. At the center of it all sat Amanda Wells, orchestrating the response to Flight 847's emergency. Captain Mitchell, Wells said, relief evident in her voice. Thank God you're here. We've got Morrison on the radio now. Sarah took the headset and sat down at the communications console. Through the static, she could hear the tension in Jake Morrison's voice, as he communicated with air traffic control. Flight 847. This is Captain Sarah Mitchell at Heathrow Operations. Jake, can you hear me? Captain Mitchell. Thank God. Tom collapsed about 40 minutes ago. The flight attendants got him stabilized, but he's unconscious. I'm alone up here, and I could really use some guidance. Sarah could hear the fear beneath Morrison's professional demeanor. She had been in his position once, though not in such extreme circumstances. The weight of responsibility for hundreds of lives was overwhelming, even for experienced pilots. Okay, Jake, first things first. How are you doing? Are you handling the aircraft okay? Yes, ma'am. Autopilot is engaged. We're maintaining 35,000 feet. Airspeed is stable. But I'm getting reports of severe weather ahead, and I'm not sure about the best routing. Sarah pulled up the weather display on her screen. What she saw made her blood run cold. A massive storm system stretched across the Atlantic, with wind speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour and turbulence that could tear an aircraft apart. Jake, I'm looking at the weather radar now. You're going to need to make some significant course corrections. The storm system is much larger than originally predicted. For the next hour, Sarah guided Morrison through a series of navigation changes, helping him thread the Boeing 777 between dangerous weather cells. She monitored his fuel consumption, calculated alternate routing options, and provided constant reassurance as he faced each new challenge. Captain Mitchell, Morrison said during one of their communications, I want you to know that I've heard about your reputation. Everyone says you're the best pilot in the company when it comes to handling difficult weather. I appreciate that, Jake, but right now you're the one flying the aircraft. I'm just providing guidance. You're doing excellent work. But Sarah knew that words of encouragement weren't going to be enough. The weather system was intensifying, and Morrison was approaching the limits of his experience. Worse, fuel consumption was higher than anticipated due to the course deviations, and landing alternatives were becoming limited. Jake, I need you to give me your current fuel status, Sarah said. We're showing 38,000 pounds remaining. That should be enough to reach Heathrow with standard reserves. Sarah recalculated the numbers based on the routing changes and weather conditions. The math was troubling. Jake, with the headwinds you're facing and the extended routing, you're going to be cutting it close. We need to start considering alternate airports. What do you recommend? Sarah studied the weather patterns and airport conditions across Europe. Most airports were reporting deteriorating conditions as the storm system moved eastward. But there was one possibility that might work. Shannon Airport in Ireland is still reporting acceptable conditions. It's about 300 miles closer than Heathrow, and their weather should hold for at least another few hours. Should I divert there now? Not yet. Let's see how the weather develops. But we need to keep it as an option. The next 2 hours tested every aspect of Sarah's knowledge and experience. She guided Morrison through increasingly complex weather avoidance maneuvers, helped him calculate fuel burn rates, and coordinated with air traffic control to secure priority routing. All the while, she maintained constant communication with the aircraft, providing both technical guidance and emotional support. Captain Mitchell, Morrison said during one particularly challenging sequence, I don't think I can do this. The weather is getting worse, and I'm running out of options. Sarah could hear the panic creeping into his voice. This was the moment she had been dreading, the point where fear could overcome training and lead to poor decision-making. Jake, listen to me. You are absolutely capable of handling this situation. You've been flying for 4 years, you've got excellent training, and you've been making good decisions all night. I need you to trust yourself. But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I can't get everyone down safely? Sarah thought about her own journey, the 12 rejections, the skepticism, the moments of doubt. She remembered what Frank Rodriguez had told her years ago in Nebraska. Flying isn't about being perfect. It's about making the best decisions. You can with the information you have. Jake, fear is normal. Every pilot experiences it. The key is not to let it paralyze you. You've got 237 people depending on you, and you have the skills to get them home safely. I believe in you. The crisis reached its peak as Flight 847 approached the Irish coast. The weather had continued to deteriorate, and Shannon Airport was now reporting strong crosswinds and reduced visibility. Heathrow was completely socked in with heavy rain and fog. Captain Mitchell, Shannon is reporting crosswinds at 35 knots, gusting to 45. The visibility is down to half a mile. I don't know if I can handle that kind of approach. Sarah studied the weather data. The conditions were challenging, but not impossible for an experienced pilot. Morrison, however, had limited experience with crosswind landings in heavy aircraft. Jake, I'm going to talk you through this step by step. The Boeing 777 is a stable aircraft, and crosswind landings are well within its capabilities. We're going to take this approach slowly and methodically. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah provided detailed guidance on crosswind landing techniques. She walked Morrison through the proper approach speeds, the timing of control inputs, and the decision points for executing a go-around if conditions became unsafe. Remember, Jake, you're not fighting the crosswind, you're working with it. Use the rudder to keep the aircraft aligned with the runway, and use the ailerons to prevent drift. The aircraft wants to land safely. You just need to guide it. As Flight 847 began its final approach to Shannon Airport, Sarah found herself holding her breath. Through the radio, she could hear Morrison's breathing, the sound of the aircraft's engines, and the occasional update from air traffic control. 500 feet, airspeed is good, Morrison reported. Excellent. Remember to keep your corrections small and smooth. 300 feet, I can see the runway lights. Perfect. You're doing great. 100 feet, touching down now. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Sarah stared at the radio, waiting for confirmation that 237 lives had been saved by a young pilot who had risen to meet the greatest challenge of his career. We're down. We're on the ground at Shannon. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, filled with relief and triumph. All passengers and crew are safe. The operations center erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the tension of the past 6 hours finally released. She had helped guide a fellow pilot through the most challenging situation of his career, and everyone had survived. Jake, that was outstanding flying, she said into the microphone. You should be proud of yourself. I couldn't have done it without you, Captain Mitchell. You saved us all. But Sarah knew that wasn't true. She had provided guidance and support, but Jake Morrison had been the one in the cockpit, making the critical decisions and executing the difficult maneuvers. He had found the courage and skill within himself to meet the challenge. The aftermath of Flight 847's emergency landing made international news. The story of the young first officer who had safely landed a Boeing 777 in severe weather conditions after his captain's medical emergency captured the public's imagination. But those within the aviation community knew the real story, that Captain Sarah Mitchell had played a crucial role in guiding Morrison through the crisis. You did something extraordinary last night, Amanda Wells told Sarah as they debriefed the incident. Your guidance and expertise saved 237 lives. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From watching crop dusters in Nebraska to talking a pilot through an emergency landing over the Atlantic Ocean, every experience had prepared her for this night. I was just doing my job, she replied. No, you were doing much more than that. You were being the kind of pilot that others aspire to become. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a call that would change her life once again. But this time it wasn't an emergency. It was an opportunity that would test her skills in ways she had never imagined. "Captain Mitchell, this is Chief Pilot Richards at headquarters. We have a situation, and we need our best pilot to handle it. Are you available for a special assignment?" Sarah looked out the window of her hotel room in Paris, watching aircraft take off and land at Charles de Gaulle Airport. She had no idea that her next assignment would become the defining moment of her career, the flight that would transform her from a skilled pilot into a legend. "I'm available," she said. "What do you need me to do?" What Chief Pilot Richards told her next would launch Sarah Mitchell into the most challenging and dangerous flight of her career, a mission that would require every skill she had learned, every instinct she had developed, and every ounce of courage she possessed. The stakes would be higher than she had ever imagined, and the margin for error would be virtually non-existent. But Sarah Mitchell was ready. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Chief Pilot William Richards rarely made calls at midnight, especially not to pilots stationed overseas. When Sarah Mitchell's phone rang in her Paris hotel room 3 weeks after the Flight 847 incident, she knew something extraordinary was happening. "Captain Mitchell, I need you in Washington, D.C. tomorrow morning. There's a classified briefing at 0800 hours. Classified?" Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "I can't discuss details over an unsecured line. What I can tell you is that the Department of Homeland Security has requested our most experienced pilot for a special operation. Your name was the first one that came to mind." Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. In her 15 years of flying, she had never been involved in anything requiring government security clearance. "Sir, can you at least tell me what type of aircraft I'll be flying?" "A Boeing 777-300R. Beyond that, everything will be explained in the briefing. Pack for an extended assignment, Captain." This could take several weeks. 24 hours later, Sarah found herself in a windowless conference room in a nondescript building in Arlington, Virginia. Around the table sat officials from Homeland Security, the FBI, and what appeared to be military intelligence officers. The atmosphere was tense, professional, and entirely unlike anything she had experienced in commercial aviation. "Captain Mitchell," said Director Patricia Hayes from Homeland Security, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. You'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before we proceed." Sarah signed the documents without hesitation, her curiosity overriding any apprehension. 3 months ago, Director Hayes continued, we intercepted communications indicating a planned terrorist attack on a major international flight. The plot involves hijacking a commercial aircraft and using it as a weapon against a high-value target on the ground. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. The implications were staggering. We believe the attack is scheduled for some time in the next 2 weeks. The target appears to be a summit meeting of world leaders scheduled to take place in Geneva, Switzerland. Nearly 40 heads of state will be in attendance. FBI agent Robert Nash took over the briefing. Our intelligence suggests that terrorists have infiltrated the crew of a charter flight that will be transporting delegates to the summit. They plan to commandeer the aircraft during flight and redirect it toward the convention center in Geneva. What does this have to do with me? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand. We need someone to fly a shadow mission, Director Hayes explained. You'll be piloting a nearly identical aircraft, following the same flight path as the suspected target. If our intelligence is correct and the hijacking occurs, you'll need to intercept and stop the terrorist aircraft before it can reach Geneva. Sarah stared at the officials around the table. You're asking me to engage in aerial combat with a commercial airliner? We're asking you to prevent a catastrophic attack that could kill thousands of people, including the leaders of the free world, Agent Nash replied. The aircraft you'll be flying will be equipped with specialized systems designed to disable another aircraft without destroying it. Think of it as airborne law enforcement. The technology they described seemed like science fiction. The Boeing 777 had been modified with electromagnetic pulse generators that could disable another aircraft's electronics, forcing it to land. There were also systems for close-range communication penetration and even the ability to take remote control of another aircraft's systems under certain circumstances. This is highly experimental technology, admitted Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Most of it has only been tested in simulators and controlled environments. You would be the first pilot to use these systems in a real-world scenario. Sarah absorbed the magnitude of what they were asking. She would be flying an experimental aircraft using untested technology to stop terrorists who had already demonstrated their willingness to die for their cause. What about passengers? She asked. If I'm following the same flight path as a legitimate charter flight, there will be innocent people aboard the target aircraft. That's why we need the best pilot we can find, Director Hayes said. Someone with the skills to stop the threat while minimizing harm to civilians. Your record shows you have the technical expertise and the judgment to handle this type of mission. Sarah thought about Jake Morrison alone in the cockpit of Flight 847, facing impossible odds. She had helped him find the courage to save 237 lives. Now she was being asked to potentially save thousands more. I'll need complete technical specifications for all the systems, she said. And I want unlimited simulator time to practice with the equipment. Done, Dr. Vasquez replied immediately. I also want to choose my own first officer. Someone I trust. Completely. Also done. Who do you have in mind? Sarah didn't hesitate. Marcus Thompson. He's former military, highly experienced, and I've flown with him before. If I'm going into this situation, I want him beside me. The next 10 days were the most intensive training period of Sarah's career. At a classified facility in Nevada, she learned to operate systems that push the boundaries of aviation technology. The electromagnetic pulse generators could disable an aircraft's flight management computers while leaving basic flight controls operational. The communication penetration system could override radio frequencies and speak directly to passengers and crew aboard another aircraft. Most challenging was the remote control capability. Under specific circumstances, if another aircraft's systems were compatible, Sarah could theoretically take control of its autopilot and navigation systems. The technology required precise positioning and timing, and it only worked if the target aircraft's defenses hadn't been modified. This is incredibly dangerous, Marcus Thompson said during one of their training sessions. He had accepted the mission without question when Sarah called him, but the reality of what they were attempting was sobering. The margin for error is essentially zero, Sarah agreed. If we make a mistake, we could cause the very catastrophe we're trying to prevent. And if we do nothing, terrorists crash a plane full of innocent people into a building full of world leaders, Marcus replied. I'd rather take the risk than live with the alternative. Sarah appreciated Marcus's steady presence during the intense preparation. He absorbed the technical training with military efficiency, while helping her work through the tactical scenarios they might face. They practiced high-speed intercepts, close formation flying, and emergency procedures until the maneuvers became instinctive. Dr. Vasquez briefed them on the intelligence they had gathered about the terrorist plot. We believe the attack will involve 3 to 5 individuals who have infiltrated the crew of Charter Flight International 439. The flight is scheduled to depart London Heathrow, bound for Geneva, with approximately 180 passengers, mostly diplomats. And their staff. What's our cover story? Sarah asked. You'll be flying as Skyline Airlines Flight 1247, also bound for Geneva. Your passenger manifest will show government officials and security personnel. In reality, the aircraft will carry a specialized response team in case ground intervention becomes necessary. Agent Nash provided the final piece of intelligence. We believe the hijacking will occur approximately 90 minutes into the flight, when the aircraft is over the Alps approaching Swiss airspace. Our analysts think the terrorists will wait until they're close to their target before revealing themselves. Sarah studied the flight path on the tactical display. The route took both aircraft over some of the most challenging terrain in Europe. The Alps presented their own dangers, with unpredictable weather patterns and limited options for emergency landings. "If something goes wrong up there," she told Marcus, "we'll be on our own. There won't be any backup, no emergency services, no ground support. Then we better not let anything go wrong." Marcus replied with characteristic calm. The morning of the mission dawned clear and cold at Heathrow Airport. Sarah and Marcus arrived at the aircraft 3 hours before departure, conducting the most thorough pre-flight inspection of their careers. Every system was checked and double-checked. The experimental equipment was tested and verified operational. In the passenger cabin, 24 members of an elite tactical response team prepared for a mission unlike anything they had attempted before. If Sarah and Marcus could force the terrorist aircraft to land, this team would be responsible for neutralizing the threat on the ground. "Captain Mitchell," said team leader Colonel David Price, "I want you to know that everyone aboard this aircraft volunteered for this mission. We all understand the risks, and we're honored to be flying with you." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. It wasn't just the potential victims in Geneva or the passengers aboard the target aircraft. Now she was also responsible for the lives of the highly trained specialists who had trusted her with their mission. At 10:30 hours, both aircraft departed Heathrow within minutes of each other. Charter Flight International 439 took off first, followed by Sarah's shadow flight. To any observer, they appeared to be routine commercial flights bound for Switzerland. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. Both aircraft maintained their assigned altitudes and followed their planned routes. Sarah monitored the radio frequencies while Marcus tracked their target on the experimental detection systems. "Target aircraft are maintaining a normal flight profile," Marcus reported. "No unusual radio traffic, no deviation from the assigned course." Sarah found herself hoping that the intelligence had been wrong, that this elaborate mission was unnecessary. Perhaps the terrorist threat had been neutralized, or maybe the attack had been postponed. At 11:47 hours, everything changed. "Emergency transmission from Charter Flight 439, the air traffic controller announced over the radio. "They're reporting a hijacking in progress." Sarah's hands tightened on the controls as the moment she had trained for finally arrived. Somewhere ahead of them, terrorists had taken control of an aircraft carrying 180 innocent people. The next few hours would determine whether thousands of lives would be saved or lost. "Marcus, bring all systems online," Sarah commanded. "It's time to go to work." The experimental aircraft responded to her touch as she increased power and began closing the distance to their target. Through the cockpit windows, she could see the snow-covered peaks of the Alps rising ahead of them, beautiful and treacherous in the afternoon sunlight. "Target acquired on radar," Marcus announced. "Distance 12 miles and closing." Sarah took a deep breath and activated the communication system that would allow her to speak directly to the terrorists aboard the other aircraft. What she said in the next few minutes could determine the outcome of the entire mission. "Charter Flight 439. This is Captain Sarah Mitchell of the United States government. I am ordering you to return to your assigned course immediately." The response came back in accented English, filled with rage and determination. "American pilot, you cannot stop us. Today the enemies of our people will pay for their crimes. We will not be deterred." Sarah realized that negotiation was not going to work. The terrorists were committed to their mission, just as she was committed to stopping them. The confrontation she had trained for was about to begin at 35,000 feet above some of the most dangerous terrain in the world, the ultimate test of her skills. Courage and judgment was finally at hand. The hijacked aircraft appeared on Sarah's visual display as a distant speck against the snow-capped alpine peaks. Charter Flight 439 had deviated from its assigned course and was now heading directly toward Geneva at maximum speed. Inside that aircraft, 180 innocent passengers sat unknowing that their plane had become a weapon aimed at the heart of international diplomacy. Range, 8 miles in closing, Marcus reported from the right seat, his fingers dancing across the experimental control systems. Target altitude 37,000 feet, airspeed 540 knots. They're pushing that 777 to its limits. Sarah adjusted her approach. Angle, positioning their aircraft slightly above and behind the terrorist-controlled plane. Through her headset, she could hear the frantic communications between air traffic control and the hijacked flight. Desperate attempts to establish contact that went unanswered. Charter 439, this is Geneva Control. You are off course and entering restricted airspace. Please respond immediately. Silence. Sarah activated the direct communication penetration system, her voice cutting through the terrorist aircraft's radio frequencies. This is Captain Sarah Mitchell. I'm ordering you to level off and return to your assigned altitude. You have 60 seconds to comply. The response crackled back with cold determination. American woman, your threats mean nothing. We have already accepted martyrdom. Turn away, or you will die with us. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alpine air outside. She had dealt with mechanical failures, severe weather, and countless emergencies, but never with someone actively trying to kill innocent people. Marcus, initiate the electromagnetic pulse sequence. Target their navigation systems first. EMP system charging, Marcus confirmed, monitoring the energy readings on his display. 30 seconds to full power. The technology was untested in real-world conditions. Dr. Vasquez had warned them that the electromagnetic pulse could have unpredictable effects on both aircraft if they were too close together. But with Geneva only minutes away, Sarah had no choice but to take the risk. EMP ready for deployment, Marcus announced. Fire. An invisible wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed from their aircraft toward the terrorist plane. Sarah watched her instruments carefully, looking for any sign that their own systems had been affected. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the hijacked aircraft began to waver slightly in its flight path. It's working, Marcus said, monitoring the target's behavior. Their autopilot has disconnected. They're flying manually now. Sarah moved closer, reducing the distance between the two aircraft to less than a mile. At this range, she could see the other plane clearly, a white Boeing 777 with Charter Flight International markings, appearing completely normal except for its deadly intent. Charter 439, your navigation systems have been disabled. Land immediately at the nearest available airport, or I will be forced to take additional action. We do not need your Western technology to complete our mission, came the defiant reply. We will fly this aircraft into the summit building with our own hands if necessary. Sarah realized that disabling their electronics wouldn't be enough. The terrorists were prepared to fly manually, using visual navigation to reach their target. She would need to use more aggressive measures. Prepare the control override system, she ordered Marcus. Sarah, that technology has never been tested. On a live aircraft, Marcus warned. If something goes wrong, we could cause them to crash. If we don't try, they're going to crash anyway, right into a building full of world leaders. Marcus activated the override system, attempting to establish a wireless connection with the hijacked aircraft's flight management computer. Process was delicate and required precise positioning relative to the target. I need you to get us within 500 feet of their aircraft, Marcus said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cockpit temperature. Sarah eased their plane closer. fighting the turbulence created by the other aircraft's wake. At this distance, any sudden movement could result in a catastrophic collision. Her hands remained steady on the controls, drawing on years of experience flying in close proximity to other aircraft. "Connection established," Marcus announced. "I'm uploading the override commands now." For a terrifying moment, the hijacked aircraft's flight path became erratic as its computer systems fought between terrorist control and Sarah's remote commands. The plane rolled left, then right, climbing and descending unpredictably. "They're fighting the override," Marcus reported. "The terrorists are trying to disconnect their flight management system manually." Sarah watched in horror as the hijacked aircraft entered a steep dive, its nose pointing directly toward the Swiss countryside below. If she couldn't regain control, 180 people would die in the next few minutes. "Cut the override," she ordered. "We're making it worse." Marcus immediately terminated the connection, and the terrorist pilot managed to pull the aircraft out of its dive. But the maneuver had cost them altitude and brought them dangerously close to the Alpine peaks. "New plan," Sarah said, her mind racing through alternatives. "We're going to force them down using physical intervention." "You mean ramming them?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "Not ramming, herding, like a sheepdog with cattle. We use our aircraft to physically block their path to Geneva." Sarah had never attempted such a maneuver, but she understood the principles of aerodynamics well enough to know it might work. By positioning her aircraft in specific locations relative to the terrorist plane, she could create air pressure changes and wake turbulence that would make it impossible for them to maintain their desired course. She moved their aircraft directly in front of the hijacked plane, forcing the terrorist pilot to either change course or risk a collision. The hijacker chose to dive beneath Sarah's aircraft, but she anticipated the move and dove with them, staying directly in their path. "You're insane, American pilot." The terrorist screamed over the radio, "You will kill us all." "Then change course and land at the nearest airport," Sarah replied calmly, maintaining her blocking position for the next 10 minutes. Sarah engaged in a deadly game of aerial chess above the Alps. Every time the terrorist pilot tried to turn toward Geneva, she was there to block the path. When they attempted to climb above her, she climbed faster. When they dove toward the valleys, she dove with them. Marcus monitored their fuel consumption with growing concern. "Sarah, we're burning fuel at an unsustainable rate. If this continues much longer, we won't have enough to reach an airport ourselves." "How long until they reach Geneva at their current speed?" Sarah asked. 12 minutes if they can maintain a direct course." Sarah realized she needed to end this confrontation quickly. The physical blocking maneuvers were working, but they were also draining both aircraft's fuel reserves. She needed a way to force the terrorists to land immediately. "Marcus, do we still have communication access to their passenger cabin?" "Yes, the penetration system can reach their public address system." Sarah activated the cabin communication link, knowing that her words would be heard by every passenger aboard the hijacked aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell of the United States government. Your aircraft has been hijacked by terrorists who intend to crash your plane into a building in Geneva. The hijackers are in control of your cockpit, but they cannot succeed if you act now. You must overpower them immediately." The effect was instantaneous. Through the radio, Sarah could hear shouting and commotion from the hijacked aircraft's cockpit. The passengers, finally aware of their true situation, were fighting back. "You have doomed them all." The lead terrorist screamed over the radio, but his voice was strained, distracted by the struggle taking place behind him. The hijacked aircraft's flight path became increasingly erratic as the terrorists fought to maintain control while dealing with angry passengers. Sarah seized the opportunity to move even closer, using her aircraft's wake turbulence to further destabilize their flight. "Sarah, look," Marcus pointed out the cockpit window. Through the other aircraft's windows, Sarah could see the struggle. taking place inside. Passengers were rushing toward the cockpit, overwhelming the hijackers through sheer numbers. The terrorist pilot was trying to maintain control of the aircraft while fighting off multiple attackers. Suddenly, the radio crackled with a new voice, American accented and breathless with exertion. "This is Ambassador Johnson aboard charter. Flight 439, we've retaken the cockpit. The terrorists are subdued, but our pilot is injured. Can anyone help us land this aircraft?" Sarah felt a surge of relief and pride. The passengers had found the courage to fight back, just as she had hoped. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. "Ambassador Johnson, this is Captain Mitchell. I'm going to guide you to the nearest airport. Follow my instructions exactly, and we'll get everyone down safely." The nearest suitable airport was Munich, still 40 minutes away, but well within their fuel range. Sarah took the lead, guiding the damaged aircraft through a careful descent toward German airspace. The terrorist pilot had been injured in the struggle, and several flight instruments had been damaged during the fight. "Your airspeed is too high," Sarah radioed as they approached Munich's runway. "Reduce power and extend your flaps." Ambassador Johnson, who had some basic flying experience from his military days, followed Sarah's instructions with admirable precision. The landing wasn't pretty. The aircraft touched down hard and veered slightly off the center line. But everyone aboard survived. As Sarah watched the emergency vehicle surround the hijacked aircraft on Munich's runway, she felt the tension of the past hours finally begin to release. The terrorist plot had been thwarted, 180 innocent lives had been saved, and the Geneva summit would proceed as planned. "Control tower to Skyline 1247, came the voice from Munich Air Traffic Control. "Outstanding work, Captain. You've prevented a catastrophe today." Sarah keyed her microphone for the final time on this extraordinary mission. "Just doing my job," she replied, though she knew this had been far more than any commercial pilot should ever be asked to do. As their aircraft touched down in Munich, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a farm girl in Nebraska who was rejected 12 times by the same airline, to the pilot who had just prevented one of the most audacious terrorist attacks in aviation history. The little girl who had watched crop dusters over cornfields could never have imagined that her dreams of flying would one day save thousands of lives. But every rejection, every challenge, every moment of doubt had prepared her for this day. Skyline Airlines, the company that had once deemed her unworthy, now owed their reputation and possibly their existence to the pilot they had almost never hired. 6 months after the Munich incident, Sarah Mitchell stood in the boardroom of Skyline Airlines headquarters in Chicago, facing the same executives who had once questioned whether she belonged in their cockpit. Today, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. CEO Jonathan Patterson rose from his chair as she entered. "Captain Mitchell, on behalf of Skyline Airlines and the entire aviation industry, I want to thank you for your extraordinary service. Your actions prevented what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack in aviation history." The commendation ceremony was attended by officials from multiple governments, airline executives from around the world, and fellow pilots who had traveled from across the country to honor her achievements. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came when Frank Rodriguez walked into the room. Her old mentor from Millbrook Municipal Airport looked exactly the same. Weathered hands, kind eyes, and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life teaching others to fly. He was now in his 70s, but his presence filled the room with the same warmth Sarah remembered from her childhood. "I always knew you were special," Frank said, embracing her. "But I never imagined you'd save the world." "I didn't save the world," Sarah replied. "I just did what you taught me. Read the situation, trust my instincts, and never give up." The official ceremony included awards from the Department of Homeland Security, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and a special recognition From the survivors of Charter Flight 439, Ambassador Johnson, who had helped retake the hijacked aircraft, spoke about Sarah's role in coordinating the passenger uprising. Captain Mitchell didn't just prevent a terrorist attack, he told the assembled crowd. She showed 180 people that they had the power to save themselves. Her voice over that radio gave us the courage to fight back. But the most significant moment came when Marcus Thompson stepped forward to present Sarah with a gift from her fellow pilots, a custom flight jacket embroidered with the tail numbers of every aircraft she had ever flown, from the first Cessna 172 in Nebraska to the experimental Boeing 777 that had chased down terrorists over the Alps. This represents more than just aircraft, Marcus explained. It represents every person whose life you've touched, every pilot you've inspired, and every barrier you've broken down for those who will follow. Sarah's parents had flown in from Nebraska for the ceremony. Linda Mitchell, who had once worried about her daughter's dangerous career choice, now beamed with pride as she watched Sarah receive recognition from world leaders. Thomas Mitchell, the practical farmer who had never understood his daughter's dreams, finally comprehended the magnitude of what she had accomplished. "I was wrong to doubt you," her father whispered as they embraced after the ceremony. "You've done something that will be remembered long after we're all gone." The media attention following the Munich incident had been overwhelming. News outlets around the world had covered the story of the small-town pilot who had prevented a catastrophic attack. Documentary filmmakers, book publishers, and movie producers had all approached Sarah with offers to tell her story, but Sarah had declined most of these opportunities, preferring to let her actions speak louder than publicity. She did agree to one interview with Aviation Week magazine, where she was asked about the moment that defined her career. "People keep calling Munich my greatest achievement," she said. "But I think my greatest achievement was never giving up." After that 12th rejection, every pilot faces moments when they question whether they belong in the cockpit. The key is to keep flying anyway. The interview became one of the most read articles in the magazine's history, inspiring countless young pilots to persevere through their own challenges. Flight schools across the country began using Sarah's story as an example of dedication and professionalism. 6 months after Munich, Sarah received another call that would change her life, but this time it came with an invitation rather than an emergency. "Captain Mitchell, this is Administrator Patricia Williams from the Federal Aviation Administration. We'd like to offer you a position as our new Director of Pilot Training and Safety Standards. The job would mean leaving commercial flying to focus on improving training standards for the entire aviation industry. Sarah would be responsible for developing new safety protocols, enhancing emergency response procedures, and ensuring that future pilots receive the best possible preparation for the challenges they would face. You've demonstrated exceptional judgment under pressure," Administrator Williams explained. "We need someone with your experience to help us prepare the next generation of pilots for an increasingly complex aviation environment." Sarah accepted the position, understanding that her influence could extend far beyond her own cockpit. At the FAA, she implemented new training requirements that emphasized real-world problem-solving over rote memorization. She insisted that all commercial pilots receive training in crisis communication, passenger psychology, and unconventional emergency procedures. Her first major initiative was the development of the Mitchell Protocol, a comprehensive training program that prepared pilots for hijacking situations, terrorist threats, and other security-related emergencies. The program was adopted by airlines worldwide and credited with preventing several potential attacks in the years that followed. But Sarah's most important contribution was her mentorship of young pilots, particularly women and minorities who faced the same barriers she had once encountered. She established scholarship programs for disadvantaged students, created internship opportunities at major airlines, and personally advocated for qualified candidates who might otherwise be overlooked. Amanda Rivera was one of those candidates. The daughter of migrant farm workers from California, Amanda had dreamed of flying since childhood, but lacked the financial resources to pursue aviation training. Sarah's scholarship program provided the funding Amanda needed to attend flight school, and Sarah personally mentored her through the challenges of entering a male-dominated industry. "Captain Mitchell didn't just give me money for flight school," Amanda said years later when she became the youngest Latina captain in her airline's history. "She gave me the confidence to believe I belonged in the cockpit." Sarah's story continued to inspire pilots around the world. The rejected application that had once seemed like a devastating failure became a symbol of perseverance. Young pilots facing their own rejections would remember Sarah's journey and find the strength to continue pursuing their dreams. At the Millbrook Municipal Airport, Frank Rodriguez established the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Flight Training Fund, providing free flying lessons to young people from farming communities who might not otherwise have access to aviation education. The program's first graduate was a teenage girl whose dreams of flying had been inspired by hearing Sarah's story. 10 years after Munich, Sarah was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for Concordia Aviation Academy, the same school where she had once felt like an outsider. Standing at the podium where she had once been intimidated by her classmates' privileged backgrounds, she addressed a new generation of pilots. "Some of you will face rejection," she told the graduates. "Some of you will be told you don't belong, that you're not good enough, that you should find another career. When that happens, I want you to remember that every great pilot has faced doubt, both from others and from themselves. The difference between those who succeed and those who give up is simple. The successful ones keep flying." After her speech, a young man approached her with a familiar story. He had been rejected by 3 major airlines and was beginning to doubt his abilities. "Captain Mitchell, how did you know you were meant to be a pilot?" he asked. Sarah smiled, remembering the 12-year-old girl who had watched crop dusters over Nebraska cornfields. "I didn't know," she replied. "I just knew I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Sometimes that's enough." Today, Sarah Mitchell serves as the FACS Senior Advisor for Aviation Safety, continuing to shape the industry that once rejected her. Her office walls are covered with photos from her flying career, images of the small Cessna where she learned to fly, the Skyline Airlines jets she commanded, and the experimental aircraft that chased terrorists over the Alps. But the photo she treasures most shows her standing next to Frank Rodriguez, beside the same yellow crop duster that first inspired her dreams. In the background, a teenage girl watches from the airport fence, her face filled with the same wonder and determination that Sarah had possessed decades earlier. The girl who was rejected 12 times had become the woman who saved thousands of lives and inspired countless others to reach for the sky. Her legacy lives on in every pilot who refuses to give up, every student who pursues their dreams despite the obstacles, and every person who believes that determination can overcome any barrier. The sky, as Sarah learned long ago, truly has no limits for those who dare to fly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.